Good afternoon, sixth grade students. We're continuing our read of Granted, which is a very compelling book. And we're realizing that Ophelia is getting close, very close, to the place where the wish was made, the fountain. It appears at like a shopping area. So we're on chapter 18, page 108, and thank you for continuing to read along. It started with wells, the business of watery wishes, though it wasn't always coins that were thrown in them. Rocks and leaves, rose petals, rings of lost loves, brass buttons and plucked feathers and weapons of your slain enemies still gory with blood. All these have been tossed into springs and bogs and fountains through the ages, often with a wish attached. But coins were the most common, stemming from the completely ludicrous idea that fairies actually took the money and used it for something. A tip, if you will, for services rendered. Of course, human coins were basically worthless as far as fairies were concerned, unless you were one of those black market collectors who traded them for children's bloody stumped teeth, a disgusting enterprise to say the least. But a lucrative trade, as human teeth contained many interesting alchemic properties. Ophelia tried to imagine the look on Verna Tulip Frazzle's face if she tried to exchange a moldy human penny for a bottle of Frazzle's famous honeysuckle mead. What am I supposed to do with this? Verna would say, holding up the coin. Make a wish, I guess? Ophelia would reply, and they would both giggle at the thought. No, fairies weren't at all attracted by these circular metal bits with portraits of ugly dead humans scrawled on them. But coins were easy to come by, Ophelia supposed. And at least such a wish did, in fact, cost the maker something. Maybe having to pay for it, even this piddling amount, made them think a little harder about what they wanted before they tossed it into the water. But probably not. The fountain at the town center mall was thick with copper and nickel. Either nobody had bothered to come and empty the fountain of its riches in years, or the people around here were desperate and had a lot of spare change. They blended into a kind of background roar. She could probably hear them all if she listened long enough, the murmur of 1,000 bygone wishes, some quite faded with age. But it would be like picking one cricket's chirp out of a forest full. Besides, there was only one wish that mattered, and the sound of Kasara's pining far overshadowed the rest, made louder by the magic of the great tree's promise. Ophelia watched the crowd, waiting for a lull, a perfect opportunity to dart out and do her job. Except the water shooting from the top of the fountain was kind of mesmerizing. The way it frothed over, cascading down the sides, burbling into the bluish pool below. There was something magical about it, above and beyond the actual magic she knew to be there. And Ophelia could see why people passing by might pause and fish in their pockets or purses for a penny to throw. Burble, gurgle, splash, said the water. I wish, said Kasara's coin. Ophelia shook her head. She needed to focus. She shifted inside her bush, trying not to rustle the leaves. A mother with 2 kids, both boys aged somewhere between 2 and 10. Ophelia was admittedly terrible at guessing human ages, handed them both a quarter and pointed at the fountain. The smaller one threw his coin in right away, probably adding the wish after the quarter had already sunk, which unfortunately didn't count. The other, older boy, stood by the side, though, head cocked. You could see him working through the puzzle, weighing the possibilities. What to wish for? What to wish for? He took his time, and though she was impatient to get on with her mission, Ophelia found herself smiling as she watched this kid. He was a planner, thoughtful and meticulous. She could appreciate that. Finally, he dropped his quarter over the side with a satisfying plop. Ophelia didn't try to discern his wish from the others, not over the sound of Kasara's voice echoing in her head, but she knew that at this very moment the great tree was sprouting another leaf with this boy's name on it. part of her hoped his leaf would fall, though she realized just how unlikely that was. There was a time when a fairy could sneak out, pick up that boy's coin, sprinkle a little dust, and vanish back into the trees. When fairies roamed the valleys and glades and forests freely, granting any wish they pleased with little worry of running out of magic. But that was ancient history. Ophia's world was different. There wasn't room for error. She had to do her duty. She had to do what was best for her kind. The mother shooed the two boys around toward the entrance, and Ophia scanned the area again. Perimeter temporarily secure. She carefully reached beneath her collar and removed the vial that had been nestled there, the glass warm in her hands. Enough magic for one wish only. Cassara's nickel still shone bright amid the sea of shimmering coins. Ophia darted out of the bushes and flittered up to the edge of the stone fountain. The water was deep, nearly half as tall as her, no danger of drowning, but there was no way she was staying dry either, which meant an even colder journey home. It was too late to take her flight suit off. She was here. This was her moment. Grab the coin, sprinkle the dust, say the words. She plugged her nose with one hand, closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and jumped off the stone edge. But instead of hitting water, she was suddenly flying instead. Ophia's world somersaulted around her. We're on page 112, chapter 19. Ophia's world somersaulted around her, and she fought to catch her breath, her body stinging from the sudden blow. Something had knocked her, sent her soaring off the fountain and tumbling down to the cement walkway where she landed in a heap. Ophia shook her head, then looked up to find the shadow of a man draped over her. He had a thick beard and much too heavy a coat for the late spring sun. His cheeks sagged into his thick silver beard. His pants were torn, and his toes threatened to poke through the tips of his thin-skinned sneakers. He had swiped at her almost absent-mindedly, as if she were a wasp or moth, sweeping her off the fountain in mid-jump. With her eyes shut, she hadn't even seen him coming. Ophia's right hand clasped the vial as her left went straight to one of Rawleigh's canisters, afraid this man would need a good spritzing, that he'd probably seen too much, except he wasn't paying any attention to her. He sat on the edge of the fountain, leaning back, stretching out his legs, looking up at the clouds. Ophia scurried backward on hands and knees, finding the bushes again and crawling underneath them, wings folded tight against her. "Fiddlesticks," she said, frustrated enough to use the F word, or one of them anyways. First the airplane, now this. Didn't these people realize that she was a benevolent being of magic and light? Now she could have to wait for him to move before she could finish the job. That or knock him unconscious, though he looked like he'd had enough problems without some fairy blasting him with knockout gas. His eyes spoke of a sort of bone-deep weariness. Ophia didn't want to add to his troubles, but she would do what she had to. She would give him a good solid tick or two, and if he was still in her way, he was getting sprayed. She watched from behind her cover of leaves. The man pulled at his beard, glancing around the same way Ophia had, and then leaned back farther. One of his hands dipped into the water, trawling the bottom, drudging up whatever treasure he could find. Without opening his dripping wet fist, he crammed his gatherings into the pocket of his coat, and then went back for another haul. Ophia could hear the coins scraping against the bottom of the fountain. She counted in her head. He did this 6 times, 3 with each hand, before a boy, a teenager, she guessed, paused on his way into the mall and stared. "Hey, what are you doing?" The boy's voice was laced with accusation. The man with the coat full of coins startled, then stood up and stumbled off. The cuffs of his sleeves soaked through, fingers dripping. The teenage boy shook his head and went the opposite way. Ophia wanted for them both to go, checked once more to make sure the area was clear, then quickly fluttered back up to the edge of the fountain. "Oh, bumblebutt," she muttered. She turned and looked for the old man with the worn pants and shabby shoes, spying him in the parking lot, 6 fistfuls of ungrantable wishes in his pocket. Plus 1, the one she needed, that she'd been this close to grabbing, taken. before it was granted. So the coin that Aphia needs has just been grabbed, if you will, by the man. So the coin is no longer in the fountain. Chapter 20, page 115. When a fairy finishes her first 4 seasons, her founder, along with a committee of other nosy fairies, which describes the vast majority, helps her choose her path. From that point on, the young fairy trains to become part of the guild that will employ her for life. Builders are trained to build. Bakers are trained to bake. Alchemists are trained to... Aphia wasn't entirely sure exactly what alchemists did. They alchemized, which is to say they turned slightly useful junk into even more useful junk or differently useful junk, like acorns into radio transmitters or fairy dust extract into camouflage spray. Though in Aphia's estimation, there was nothing compared to the wonderful things bakers could turn cocoa beans into. Chocolate cake was its own special brand of alchemy. There were well over 24 major guilds in the Haven, each with its own rules, its own bureaucracy, its own way of doing things. But the best job by far was that of grantor. Granted, it took all kinds of fairies to make the Haven hum, to keep the enterprise running, to ensure that fairies had houses to live in, hot water to bathe in, charms to keep their homes safe, wooden forks to eat delicious chocolate pound cake with. But none of it would be possible without magic. The magic served to keep the Haven safe, and magic wouldn't be possible without grantors, the best of the brightest, trained in the noble enterprise of making wishes come true. To become a grantor took seasons of training, tests, and trials, both physical and mental. Untold talk spent studying by moonlight. It does not pay to light too many fires in a forest. Aphia estimated she spent 600 days training for her position in the guild. The ritual and rigmarole involved in actually granting a wish took one whole day. The remaining 599 were spent learning how not to get caught doing it. In other words, Aphia had spent over half her life preparing for situations just like this one. Stalking an old man through the streets of a strange city. Waiting for the most opportune time to knock him unconscious and steal his money. Putting it that way, Aphia thought, it didn't sound like such a noble enterprise after all. Of course, it wasn't really his money to begin with, was it? That's what she kept reminding herself as she darted and dodged, taking cover in bushes and treetops, under the shells of parked cars. Not the thing about the money, but about her training. That she was the best of the brightest. That she could handle this. All right, we're going to stop there, the top of page 117. That's where we'll pick up tomorrow. See what Aphia is going to do. Thank you so much, 6th grade students. Look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Take care. Be safe.